Good evening, everyone. Pleasure to see you, Eric. I sent you an email, Eric, with the copy of the minutes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay.
We can hear you and we can see you.
Yep.
Looks like you're in the library.
I have my rectangular halo.
As long as it's only that type of halo for now.
Yeah, yeah.
Dan, I'm happy to take notes.
Thank you very much. You're hereby assigned minutes for tonight.
Yeah.
For the hours that it takes. Sorry, bad humor.
Hi, Dave. Hi, Eric.
Yeah, hi.
Good evening, Dave. Yet another meeting that you get to join.
Yeah. Happy to be here. I'm betting it won't go as late as Wednesday's zoning board meeting.
Oh, I'm quite confident it won't.
How late was that, Dave?
No, this Wednesday, just busy agenda as usual.
Oh, okay.
Could be a midnight one.
Oh, that's awful.
And we're just waiting for 7 o'clock and for one more committee member to join. Excellent. We now have a quorum here. We'll get started in a moment. Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we will get the meeting started. Good evening, everyone. It is 7 o'clock. We have a quorum here. Looks like we've got a couple more people who will be joining in. So we've got 6 members of the Bylaw Review Committee that have joined in. Looks like maybe up to 7, which is awesome. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. on March 20th. Welcome, everyone. This particular meeting is being held by Zoom. The agenda is as posted on the town website. As we get started here, the first thing on the agenda itself is item 2, public engagement. This is if anyone from the public has anything is a general item that they'd like to present, they're welcome to do so at this time. We will entertain conversation throughout the meeting itself. The idea behind these meetings is to actually be as conversational as possible. So it is highly recommended to, if you'd like to contribute, feel free to use the raise hand feature or take yourself off of mute, and I will try to recognize as many people, whether you're a committee member or not, for conversation. Committee members are the only two who are allowed to take formal votes. Only a few of those are expected. So as we get started, if anyone would like to make a presentation, a short comment for the public engagement portion of the meeting, you are welcome to indicate that by a raised hand or by turning off by opening up your microphone, and happy to do so at this time. Okay, seeing none. With that, brings us over to the one administrative item that we have before we get into the meat of tonight's meeting, and that's the minutes of March 6th. These were circulated to all of the committee members, and these were taken by Lucy. Thank you very much for taking minutes. With that, we'll first take a motion to accept the minutes as presented, and then we'll open up for discussion and then a likely vote. So do we have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
So moved.
And taking minutes tonight, and she's moving for the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Do we have a second?
I second.
Was that Lucy? Was that you seconding?
Catherine.
Catherine gets her second in. Catherine is getting it. She's not on video tonight, but she is contributing by phone or by audio, which is much appreciated. So motion made by Ann, seconded by Catherine. Any discussion on the minutes themselves? I'd like to say first that I found them to be excellent in their detail and they contained all of the required elements. These minutes contained when the meeting started, the location, all of the members present, and a list of topics that were discussed with a substantive summary of each. Other comments? Seeing none, if we can have the members of the committee vote to accept the motion as made, I will call on each person by roll call in the order in which I see you on screen. Eric.
Favor, yes.
Ann.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Lucy.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
And I vote in the affirmative, so it is unanimous. Minutes are approved. I will go ahead, put a marking on them, send them off to the town clerk and to the assistant who will post them to our website. Thank you very much. That brings us over to the substantive part of this evening's meeting, which is item 4, the background of zoning recodification. So the Bylaw Review Committee, for those who are just joining us, is created by our Wakefield Town Charter to convene every 5 years. In years end, it's to be appointed in years ending in a 2 or a 7. And this particular committee was appointed last year in 2022. And the purpose of it is to review the bylaws of the town. In 2017, the committee that met at that time did a very detailed recodification of everything but the zoning bylaws. The zoning bylaws require a large amount of expertise. This particular body, we're going through the non-zoning bylaws with relative speed and making several minor updates. We have submitted 5 recommendations for the town meeting in May. Those articles have been voted on and sent over to the town council for inclusion in the warrant. The zoning process, though, to update the zoning requires a lot of discussion because zoning impacts many different people in town. As we can see by those who have joined this particular meeting, there's a lot for this. At the recommendation of the prior committee, we actually made sure that town meeting had an article to approve funds to hire outside counsel for this purpose. And those funds were approved at last year's annual town meeting in the spring. And so those are the funds that we've used. As a part of that, the committee, at the recommendation of the town council Mullen and seconded by the town council, this gets very confusing from a wording perspective, has gone ahead and entered into a contract with Mark Bobrowski of the law firm of Blattman, Bobrowski, Haverty, and Silverstein, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, to provide us with counsel and provide the town with counsel so that we can have the zoning bylaws recodified, examined, updated, made current, and otherwise meet the needs of the town in a way that they have not been reviewed in what appears to be probably about 40 years or longer, if ever, since the Zoning Act was actually enabled. So we're going to undergo a full examination of the zoning bylaw. The bylaw review committee is different than the planning board. The planning board is responsible for having a wider scope of understanding the different elements of planning, and zoning is one very significant piece. They have all been invited. The Zoning Board of Appeals obviously has a significant role in this as well. The members of that board have been invited. Other members of other related boards that have expressed interest have also been invited, as have people and members of the public and others that we know work in the real estate market for it. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining. That's a little bit of background on the project itself. With that, I'd like to introduce Attorney Mark Bobrowski. And with that, Attorney Bobrowski, if you want to do a quick little background on yourself and then explain what the various timings are for the meetings as you plan on going through things.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome all aboard to the recodification train. This is a long boat to China, but we'll get there eventually. I have worked at this line of helping cities and towns for 37 years. Actually, I started before I was a lawyer. I helped Deerfield and Orange recodify back in the early 80s. I've done about 110 or 15 towns. I've lost count. My biggest city is Lowell. I've done Medford, Haverhill, Salem, Fitchburg, New Bedford, Quincy. Those are pretty large cities. On the small end, I've worked in places that you've never heard of before, like Mount Washington, Egremont, and Alford, all of them in the Berkshires. None of those communities has more than probably 1,000 people. So for me, it's a labor of love. I learn about local issues and local solutions, and I take them to other places. And hopefully that's useful information for somebody like you going through the process now. Towns I've most recently done are Medford, Sharon, the small town of Berkeley, just north of Fall River, and Haverhill, where we took 18 drafts in order to get the job done. So generally speaking, a recodification is three moving parts. The first is that I want to make sure that the bylaw is consistent with changes in statute and in case law. You know, the governor's bill a couple of years ago, for example, added things like MBTA communities. It also added provisions for accessory dwelling units. And other issues have come to the fore. Solar is a major issue right now across the Commonwealth, with the courts going through a period of review here where they're hopefully going to come up with some better answers. So these things change all the time. I try to keep up with them. I am the author of the Handbook of Massachusetts Land Use and Planning Law, which requires me 2 times a year to supplement. My authors ask me to do that on an annual basis. So I read all the cases. It's just something that I've always done. I taught law at New England Law for 28 years. It was part of my academic background. The second part of recodification is to resolve internal inconsistencies. One section of the bylaw may say go right, and the other one may say go left. Somebody has to make a choice. And the third part of recodification is to fill glaring omissions. Typically that's in definitions, or the definitions are just wrong and they need to be corrected. There's a lot of things that are defined by other state laws. For example, child care centers are not the same thing as a nursery school. And child care centers are protected under the Dover Amendment. Nursery schools is something completely different. So there's a lot of work to be done in those three areas. Obviously, you're going to tell me where you think the bylaw needs amendment because you work with it every day. And if you've run across traps for the unwary, I need to hear about it. It might not be something that would occur to me, but your hands-on experience day to day should bring out that in the course of our meetings. And I, of course, am interested in hearing the opinions of the building commissioner, the members of other boards, including planning board, zoning board of appeals, board of health, conservation commission, anybody with an axe to grind here that comes into contact with the bylaw. The way I usually tackle this is to start like we are tonight with a zoning diagnostic discussion. I've gone through the bylaw. I've created my own first impression of it. I'll share that with you this evening. If you've got things you want to offer, feel free to chime in. We'll then begin a series of 4 theme-oriented meetings. The first meeting will focus on everybody's job description. So it will be building commissioner's office, planning board, zoning board of appeals. We'll talk about variances, site plan approval, special permits, and I also fold in the section on nonconformities in your bylaw to round out that meeting. I'll give you some draft language. We'll sort of go through it. Where you like it, I'll make notes that will keep it. If you don't like it, you'll tell me and I'll act accordingly. The second meeting is basically a coordination between the use table, which is very comprehensive, and the definitions. There's some missing definitions in terms of actual uses. I think I noted some in my memo: retail, restaurant, different types of restaurants don't have a definition, and we'll try to make the building commissioner's job a lot easier by adding definitions wherever we can. The third theme-oriented meeting is on residential uses. So it could be anything from as accessory dwelling units to, I noted that you had a couple of alternative residential development style bylaws that I'd like to know if they work, if people are taking advantage of them. And then lastly, we'll talk about commercial side of things. That has to do with parking, loading, signs, landscaping, performance standards for the conduct of business, meaning noise, lights, things of that sort that I didn't detect a lot of in your zoning today, but I'll give you some examples from other towns. At the end of those 4 meetings, I will disappear for a month and I'll put together a first draft. The first draft is color coded. So anything that's new is yellow. Anything I didn't like, I strike out. And anything that's black is pretty much what you had already. I just may have edited it to make it read better. I certainly probably have moved it because I have a specific organizational flow that I like to use in putting together a recodified bylaw. I don't track change it. I code it by hand because if I track change, huge blocks of it disappear in a deletion and they reappear somewhere else, underlined in red. And it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to make you chase that around. It also doubles or triples the pages in the draft. So I literally code it by hand, which means, of course, that I have to remove the code by hand. It takes about an hour after I get to the thorough draft. In the first draft, I'm just showing you things that we changed. There may be some things that were easy enough for me to renumber and put in the proper place. But for example, wireless bylaw will not be in the first draft. I'm just going to renumber that in all likelihood. That'll be in the second draft. And the second draft also, I carry the coding forward all the way until we get to the draft that we present to town meeting. I learned a long time ago that somebody somewhere, someplace is going to say to me, what did you change? It's easier for me to just hand them the coded version of the bylaw. They can see every change in there, except the most simple ones, which, a change of a word or something like that. So typically we go through a second draft with all in, And then after the second draft is reviewed and I prepare the third draft, that's time to go to a workshop meeting. Sometimes communities want to do an all boards meeting first. Sometimes they want to do a stakeholders meeting at which people who work with the bylaw every day come and they take a pot shot at us for things they like or don't like. The beauty of this is that I don't have a dog in the race. So I'm following your instructions. You're gonna dictate to me whether you agree with the people who come to the stakeholders meeting or you want me to stay the course with what we had originally. And then finally, we'll get to the point where the changes are becoming incrementally smaller. To go from the 5th draft to the 8th draft is generally a very simple process involving only a few items in the recodified draft as we go forward. And I think the timetable here would be at least till spring of next year. I don't think that I talked with Daniel about timing here for going to town meeting. I didn't get the sense that it was fall town meeting next year. I think it's spring town meeting next year. So that's more or less the lay of the land. Any questions on that?
And just to clarify the expectations, the soonest I can, based upon the description that was given, that I could see this committee, given our tenacity and the penchant for detail, would be fall of 2024 at the earliest, spring of 2025 as being a possibility as well.
So
before a draft is complete.
We'll pace ourselves accordingly. What I just gave you is roughly 10. I mean, there could be additional workshops. I'll rely upon you to tell me. We did build into the contract an hourly rate after a certain number of meetings, so it's going to be under your direction. But I think Haverhill and Quincy probably were the records at about 16 or 18 drafts of the ordinance in that case. And I remember doing Andover with the staff many years ago. I walked into town meeting expecting to pitch a tent and stay there for a week. And some guy called the question as I was introducing myself, and we were done. So you never know. I haven't had a lot of experience in your town. I do work statewide, and I think I've been before your zoning boards not more than once or twice. But I certainly know your area, and I've worked on many of your neighbors, Linfield, Burlington, are recent subjects of mine. So if there's no further questions, let me walk you through my memo, and feel free to chime in as we go along and tell me if there's something I missed or if there's something you want to specifically call out. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll share the screen and put my memo up.
Sure. Before we do that, it looks like Mr. Hogan has a question.
Yes, Jim Hogan of the Planning Board. Just trying to understand, and Mark, thank you for the overview of this process. I'm just trying to understand, as a member of the Planning Board, and I don't want to speak for the rest of my fellow board members, but I'm sure that they're thinking about the same thing. Is the intent of this recodification to change the underlying dynamics as it relates to how we regulate land use within the town? And the reason I say that is I'm trying to understand from the planning board's perspective, if there are major public policy questions that are going to be addressed or changed in terms of how the town approaches land use regulations, just because it seems to me as if that's something that I'd like to have a better sense of what that is, since we're the ones who are charged with managing said land use within town.
Good question. I would say that the answer is more on the negative than the positive side. So if, for example, we were making major policy changes, I would want to have along with me a planner, a consulting planner that's in private practice, for example. When I did Revere many years ago, Rick Tainter, at that time of Land Use Inc., worked with me, and he literally walked the streets and redrew the lines between the neighborhood business and the general business district. And then I got that memo when I prepared zoning regulations accordingly.
So is the, with the intent that there would be, that this process could yield things such as map changes and or revisions to allowable uses, etc.?
Unless there's, I did not build map changes into the budget, and it is not a normal part of a recodification. Now, if there's something that jumps out at everybody because it has long been agreed that it should be done, then we can always make that happen. As far as the use table is concerned, I think that this is an opportunity, if you haven't done it in 45 years, to take a look at some of the things that have happened in the world, especially given the economy in 2008, 2010, and the pandemic of the last 3 years. This is an entirely different place than it was 45 years ago. So if there are things that have come into being that you haven't taken into account, this is an opportunity to make that happen. I don't know that this is necessarily appropriate for Wakefield, but just look at the amazing growth of distribution facilities that we've seen and the opportunities that that's presented for communities that are interested in the revenue associated, the tax revenue with a distribution facility. And that includes places like Haverhill, where I've done a lot of work, but also anybody with a cloverleaf on a 4-lane highway. So if there's an opportunity like that, I'll at least bring it up. If you don't want to do it, that's your choice. I don't want anybody to think that we're just reshuffling the deck, though. That's not what this is about. There will be changes, and you should never say to somebody, and I'm cautioning you rather than admonishing you, this is going to result in changes. Even if I add definitions, it's going to result in changes. So be a little bit gun shy about telling people that our charge was not to make changes, just to make it user friendly. There are some things, for example, I noted at the end of my memo that I want you to think about that are on the borderline of procedural change, policy change. For example, Dover Amendment uses, child care centers, churches, schools. They enjoy a special benefit under the law. But in some ways, that benefit is also a curse. The intake officer is the building inspector. If the building commissioner does it wrong, the protected use pays the price. It's perhaps better to bring that use in through site plan review for Dover Amendment uses, a gentler site plan review for a use that is statutorily protected. I've had recent experience with quite a few situations in which facilities for recovering alcohol or drug abusers are proposed. Those are protected under federal law, and the wrong move by the municipality can result in a quick trip to federal district court and a painful outcome. So again, I'd rather have that come in through the committee, and I have a proposed bylaw for you to look at. You don't have anything for solar that I could find. And like I said at the beginning of my remarks, that's something that will, the Supreme Judicial Court issued a decision back in the summer, totally confusing, nobody understands it. It involves a Waltham ordinance. Time to think about it, because there are consequences if the industry thinks you're playing unfairly. So every one of these policy choices will have that kind of an introduction. If you want to back off of it, that's your choice. I'm happy. I long ago decided that I was not going to be a high-priced stenographer, though. So there's a happy middle ground.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just more of, so as part of the planning board, we've been coordinating with our economic and community development staff, and we've engaged in a master plan process, which is going to be wrapping up within the next quarter or so. Additionally, we've taken on the MBTA communities law. So some of these activities we as the planning board had already had in our mind's eye that we were going to start this process sometime probably about 12 to 18 months from now. And I think that there is a lot of value in this recodification process. And maybe this isn't a conversation for everyone here, but it sounds like a lot of these elements are elements that are being reviewed, work that a lot of people I'm sure agree need to happen, but a lot of it falls within what's traditionally the purview of the planning board. So I'll reserve further comment at this time, but that's just something that, Dan, maybe we should think about as a group. What is the process here look like in terms of what the approval for any of these revisions that potentially have policy implications would be, in terms of how to make sure there's a consistent communication between the different committees and boards and such.
Certainly, and we will continue those conversations separately as well. So thank you for your comments, Jim. Much appreciated. Dave, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Dan. Dave Hatfield, Zoning Board of Appeals Chair. Hi, Mark. I do also appreciate your comments and introduction. First meeting that I've attended, so interested to hear how this process is likely to go in your mind, and happy to be participating in it. My comment was going to be about the Chapter 40A MBTA, because that's going to be going on in parallel here, and I'm sure you're versed in it. It's new in all towns, we have to react to it, and it'll be going on in parallel with this, recodification, which I agree, having worked on the ZBA for 15 years now, yeah, there are bylaws that there are inconsistencies. There are things that definitely need to be cleaned up, and I'm happy to see that happen. But this other part is going to go on in parallel. And so how we fold these two together, because we're going to have to create an overlay district on top of ones we already have, and work in some additional language for special permits and multifamily developments and all that stuff. So we'll see how it all comes together. But on its own, the bylaws do need this effort, and I appreciate your consulting with us on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just learning about MBTA, as are you. I was lucky enough a couple of weeks ago to have a beer with the program director at DHCD. She's a good friend of my partner, Jonathan Silverstein, and we picked her brain, and I think I've got a better understanding of it now. It's futuristic. It's not a part of the recodification. It wouldn't necessarily be something under my contractual terms. But what I took away from the meeting was a most important thing, was that you just have to designate the land. The land can be occupied today. It can be a widget factory today, and you can designate it as the home of the 15 units per acre family-friendly housing. And in a sense, what MBTA envisions is the private eminent domain of the private sector, eventually recognizing that that land designated can be bought, raised, and rebuilt at a profit. It's not about 40R. 40R is, oh, there's an empty field, let's put a 40R there tomorrow. For MBTA is, oh, that's a good place for something we should have done 150 years ago. Too bad it's currently occupied, but in 10, 20, 30, 50 years, that's where the housing should be with the transit node. It's that visionary from what I can see. Well, if you'll share your screen, I'll put up my memo.
Okay, and would you like to share, Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to grab my memo and share. How's that?
That works. Thank you.
Okay. Slow me down if you need to. So, just some general remarks at the beginning here. Typically, what, when I rezoned Lexington, Marianne McCall Taylor, the retiring planning director, said, the Bobrowski brand. So this is the Bobrowski brand. These are the chapters that I typically use to organize the bylaw. And the thing I like about it, although it sometimes doesn't work out the way I planned it, is that these are expandable chapters. So you, for example, under under special regulations, non-residential regulations, if you were to adopt solar, I would probably put it at the end of chapter 7. And there's room in the end, the numbering system works fine, no matter how deep the chapter is. You always have additional numbering to use there. So too often I pick up a bylaw, even one that I've done 10 years ago, and I see that the town has just put the new stuff at the end, which doesn't make any sense. So these are the chapters: purpose, authority, establishment of districts, use regulations, dimensional and bulk requirements, nonconformities, which is typically when I do it pretty much a total rewrite, general regulations on things like signs, parking, lighting, non-residential regulations, adult uses, wireless, solar, special residential regulations. This is typically your fancier alternative housing oriented regulations. Districts, floodplain, aquifer protection, any other. I noticed that you have a signage overlay district. I've never seen anything like that before, but it would go in chapter 9. And then everybody's job description is number 10. And I like to put the definitions in the back of the book, because if I have a book in my hand, I know if I flip to the last 5 pages, I'm in the definition. I don't have to hunt around in the middle of the book, chapter 2, chapter 4. This seems to work best as a glossary. So one of the things I'll ask you to decide relatively early in the game is whether you want all the definitions in chapter 11. For example, wireless would have its own definitions in that particular bylaw. I stripped the definitions out and I put them all in the definition section. It's up to you which way you want me to go. Just some general comments about review by the Attorney General here. One of the key things I try to do, and it's worked very well, is that anything like the parking, loading, screening, signage regulations should have a special permit provision built in to offer alternatives to folks other than apply for a variance. I sat through too many deadly meetings with somebody trying to convince the Zoning Board of Appeals that they were entitled to a bigger sign because of soil conditions, shape, or topography. That just doesn't work. But I'm entitled to a bigger sign because it isn't going to hurt anybody, or it'll actually be better for the community and for the business. That's a more plausible argument. All you need to do is change that from variance to special permit, and you can have that discussion. Long ago, I worked in Holbrook, and the person in front of the board was an automobile shop. 4 brothers, I think they had 6 bays, and a parking lot for 45 cars. What's the point of that? There were never going to be 45 cars. They could apply for a special permit, reduce the parking, less asphalt. It was a parcel as you enter town, so it sent a better message than we like asphalt in Holbrook. So as I said, I think your bylaw is functional, but not well structured. I noticed when I was going through it that I frequently found myself out to sea without any indication on the page what section I was in. I had to go backward or forward in order to find a main heading that would orient me as to what I was looking at. So with that in mind, I'm gonna go back and forth between my memo and your bylaw, as I suggested in yellow there. The introductory section talks about the purposes of zoning, and the home rule amendment is an important part of the authority that you have. What a lot of towns have done is reference section 2A of the old 1976 statute. Maybe we gotta muzzle or there we go. So section 2A is intended to be a suggestion to cities and towns. A lot of cities and towns have incorporated it by reference or verbatim. There's nothing harmful about it, but I want to call your attention to a couple of things that are in section 2A. One is to conserve the value of land and buildings. The other is the prevention of blight and pollution of the environment. I'm going to just scroll over to your bylaw and see what use you made of that. In the purpose clause. Yeah, you do have to protect and conserve the value of property. Why am I calling that out? because the Supreme Judicial Court has ruled that the diminution of property value standing alone as an injury claim does not warrant a finding of standing in a lawsuit. If somebody is disgruntled because a neighbor got a permit and they go to sue, and when asked, what's your injury? They respond, my property will be diminished in value. That's not good enough, according to the Supreme Judicial Court. You have to be able to say, the lights will be too bright and therefore my property will diminish in value, or the traffic will be terrible and therefore my property will diminish in value. It has to be, according to the Supreme Judicial Court, tethered to a zoning related injury. Just diminution in property value standing alone is not enough. So there are certain types of injuries, nonetheless, that will be recognized by the court if they're called out as locally protected interests by the bylaw. View is a very good example. There's a case from Plymouth where somebody complains about a cell tower being built between their house and the ocean, but the Plymouth bylaw says view is protected. And as a result, they get standing. Right now, to preserve and conserve the value of protect and to conserve the value of property, there are people. One judge at the land court has said, if it says this in your bylaw, then somebody who is just claiming a diminution in property value has standing to file an appeal. I think that's contrary to what the Supreme Judicial Court has said, and I would take it out. But my advice would be to take it out. There's no doubt that somebody who gets standing as a result of noise, lights, parking, loading, should indeed be able to participate as a plaintiff in a lawsuit. But to just say my property will go down in value is not something that the Supreme Judicial Court has acknowledged. And you can see that your purpose clause is really just an abbreviation of what I put in my memo in terms of the other interests that the court has looked at here. So I've talked a little bit already about the definitions. I like to put them in the last chapter as a glossary. And that would include things that have their own definitions built in, like signs, cannabis, wireless. You just have to let me know where that's going. I think many of your commercial uses are undefined. Business or professional office, medical office, clinic, retail, municipal uses, greenhouse. There's plenty more. Just gave you some examples. But anything that's in the use table, unless it's abundantly clear what it is, I suggest that you come up with a workable definition. And there are standard sources. There's Rutgers University puts out a standard dictionary of zoning terminology. There are many other communities around you that have excellent definitions that I can show you. I have a bank of them on my computer that I rely upon. But the idea is that whatever's in the use table also, for the most part, should have a definition. In section 190.6, I'm just going to scroll over myself to look at that. You have definitions for the districts. And I found this to be more trouble than it's worth over the years, because I'm picking an example. Neighborhood business, primarily serving the convenience needs of local residents and not the town at large. Well, I mean, really what that is just advisory language. It's not regulatory language, but the average citizen will take a look at that and think, well, if it's something that's gone beyond the needs of the local residential neighborhoods and looks more to me like it's serving the town at large, it's illegal. And therefore I'm going to file a lawsuit. And in my opinion, the definition of the neighborhood business district is a combination of the uses that are allowed in the use table and the dimensional characteristics that are allowed in the dimensional table. You don't need to say anything more about it. That's what's allowed. Again, I don't want to encourage people to get too creative when they're unfamiliar with how to use a zoning bylaw properly. And I've seen lawsuits that turn on these subjective terms that really are just intended to be an illustration, not a regulation. So the governor's 2020 housing legislation did have provisions for ADUs, accessory dwelling units. There have been a number of communities that have adopted. The adoption of an ADU bylaw can in some cases be allowed by simple majority rather than supermajority. And there are definitions in the governor's legislation. For example, the ADU cannot be bigger than 900 square feet or 50% of the size of the principal dwelling, whichever is the smaller, I think, or the larger, I'm sorry. So there's some good things in the governor's legislation, some bad. I can just show you an example. Another example would be short-term rentals, which came out the year before, 2019. And some of your neighbors have adopted short-term rental bylaws. Linfield is an example. Medford's another example. In the use table, I always check very carefully to make sure that the protected Chapter 48, Section 3 uses are consistent with the statute. So religious use becomes land or structures for religious purposes, and nonprofit educational use becomes what the statute says, educational purposes on land owned or leased by the Commonwealth, etc. Daycare center is not child care center or school age child care program as mentioned in the statute. And you cannot, by the way, put a child care center on special permit any more than you can put a church or a school on a special permit. Those are prohibited by statute. The use table just jumps around. So I pointed out my favorite, which was fast food, followed by the office of a physician. I usually try to do several predictable categories. So I start off with residential uses, institutional and exempt uses, and then agricultural uses, then over to outdoor and indoor recreational uses, commercial uses, motor vehicle related uses, cannabis related uses. Breaks it down and makes it a little bit easier for you to find these things in some coherent order and to be able to avoid, running your finger down the page, hunting desperately for what you're searching for. The adult uses cannot stand the way you frame them here. Adult uses are protected under First Amendment, and they have been for 50 years now. To the extent that the adult uses engage in speech, the speech is protected. So if you say the adult use has to do such and so, you're regulating the speech, and that's content-based and impermissible under the Constitution. So what you generally have to do is go around that by regulating the secondary effects of the adult uses, which are crimes to person and property. And for the reasons that many people have studied, crimes to person and property in association with adult uses, there's a typical pattern where you're going after the secondary effects with reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. It's just really a rewrite to bring it more into consistency with the cases from the U.S. Supreme Court. There's no different ending. You will end up in the same place in terms of regulation, but it's just a different way around the block to get there. I see in 190.27 floodplain, FEMA's coming out with new language. I just got the language from one of the towns I'm working in, and it's literally just taking the new model and making sure that we've adapted accordingly. Under parking and loading, as I said earlier, I always like to have a special permit procedure to waive, reduce parking requirements. you might be able to get the ZBA to give you a variance, but if a neighbor sues, you're never going to be able to defend it. So I would rather have it be a jump ball on detriment versus betterment. If there's no detriment, you get the special permit. If there's a significant detriment, you don't. The special permit site plan approval language was fine. This is what I normally recommend. There's a balancing test up front. Let's take a look at whether the adverse effects of the proposed use will or will not outweigh beneficial impacts to the town, and consider the following factors. Economic or community needs which are served by the proposal. For example, if you've already got 7 used or not used, but new car sales lots on that road, why do you need another one? I'm reminded of Tewksbury up 495, which pretty much reached this saturation point 15 years ago and decided they weren't doing new car dealerships at the junction of 495 and 38. Traffic flow and safety, adequacy of utilities, neighborhood character, impacts on the environment, which could be everything from stormwater to lights to noise, and then potential economic impact. I don't think that you would necessarily deny a special permit for a negative economic impact standing alone, but it sure is an interesting thing to know when you're facing a vote, what the fiscal impact is going to be on city services, tax base, and employment. I've been working an awful lot the last 3 years on these logistical facilities. The one I'm working on right now for the small town of Berkeley, I'm the planning board's lawyer, is a couple of warehouses at about 400,000 square feet total. And the proponent is representing to the town that they're going to get something on the order of 700,000 a year in tax revenue, plus motor vehicle excise tax. The cost to the municipality will be something, not nothing, but there'll be plenty of money left over. And this is a small town that needs a budget that's not exclusively commercial. So there is always a discussion at the meetings about whether the dance with the devil here to get the money is worth the impacts on land use. But that's, that's the system we have. Site plan, no special permit. This is a category that you've invented. I noticed that you're the only persons I've ever seen, town I've ever seen, that prescribed the appeal to go to the ZBA. And I've spent 25 years trying to get the appeal to go directly to court for a number of different reasons. Number one, with all due respect to the ZBA and the planning board, the ZBA is not a superior board to the planning board. It's equal. So having one board review another board's work strikes me more as the business of the judge, not the board. And then otherwise, the planning board has developed an expertise in looking at site plans that the ZBA doesn't necessarily repeat often. So I think if the planning board says that it's a good or a bad site plan, the next person in line to review that should be the judge. And I long ago started saying that an appeal of a site plan goes directly to Land or Superior Court pursuant to Chapter 48, Section 17. When I first started writing that, the Attorney General's office told me that I couldn't do it, and I told them I was going to do it anyway. And there have now been 10 or 12 cases that say you can do that. So the one thing that you have to do, if you're going to do that, go directly to court. Last sentence of this comment is you have to have a public hearing in town hall. You can't do it I live in Concord. If there's no special permit, the site plan board is the planning board, but there's no requirement of a planning board no requirement of a planning board public hearing. And as a result, the appeal goes to the Board of Appeals. That we should change that here. But there's other fish to fry, apparently.
So Mark, this is Dave.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I don't think this has ever come up, not that I'm really reading this paragraph that you're pointing out. But it does make sense. I think in general, the use of special permit granting authority and how it's applied in our bylaw, I think needs some careful review. Because in many cases it's the ZBA, in some cases it's the planning board, and in some cases I think it could be cleaned up. I think, again, inconsistencies within the bylaw.
Well, what I usually do is rather than put SP in the use table, I put PB if it's the planning board, or BA if it's the Board of Appeals, or SP if it's the select board. So not only do we know it's a special permit, we know who the granting authority is. I think I'm still searching to try to figure out who the SP refers to in your chart. And I'm sure it's sometimes planning board, sometimes the ZBA, but it's just easier to put
specific paragraphs will make reference to it. But anyway, it's just, you know, this is an interesting one you've brought out. It was in my notes too. It's just an area I think we need to look at. Yeah.
And I think I'd echo that from the planning board. I know I've had separate conversations with individual members of the planning board, but I think that we also perceive that there's some cleanup that could be occurred, and maybe a little more thoughtful delineation of scope between the two authorities.
Well, this is an unfortunate area of the law. The land court judges have had enough of this. I mean, both Judge Spicer and Judge Foster at the land court now start every site plan case by saying, here we go again, the black hole of the zoning act, specifically because it's not even mentioned in the zoning act, although there is now a reference to site plan review in the new bond provision. That's the only reference there is. So it's time. We've only been doing this. Look at the date of the YD dugout case, 1970. That's the first site plan case. It's been 53 years and we can't figure out how to put a definition of this and some procedures for it in the statute. What are we waiting for? So I decided I was going to take over. And so it's worked out pretty well. There's a section on the ZBA. I think the planning board gets a section too. And so we'll add that in. It's just going to be a recitation of their powers. I've read 19065 a couple of times, and I still don't know whether the ZBA is authorized to grant a use variance. But the statute says that if you're going to grant a use variance, the bylaw has to specifically authorize that power. And most towns don't. You know, variances, use variances in particular, are really useful tools. Virtually every city I've ever worked in relies upon use variances to eliminate the need to rezone a piece of property every time somebody has a new idea. My partner, Jonathan, is the land use lawyer in Everett. He did the casino for the city and has stayed on. And he couldn't make a meeting back in December. He had a child with a birthday or something. And he said, can you go? I said, sure. They had 4 variances, 2 use variances on the agenda that night, and they granted them all. And I said, this is refreshing. Congratulations. Most towns abhor a use variance, but sometimes it's a creative and correct answer. It may not be defensible before a judge, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't a useful tool. Fees don't belong in the zoning bylaw because you have to go to town meeting in order to change the fees. So I would move these to the special permit granting authority regulations. There'll be some things that we encounter along the way that will be more regulation than bylaw. And I don't know whether or not planning board currently has rules and regulations. I'm sure you have subdivision regulations, but I'm talking about rules and regulations governing site plan review or rules and regulations governing special permits. ZBA, same thing. If you want to see such examples, I did all of Lexington's regulations about 10 years ago, including the planning board subdivision regulations, the site plan regulations, and the special permit regulations. All of them are on the planning board's website. Signs, I've already discussed this waiver provision. Nonconformities, I think that I've developed a fairly comprehensive way to deal with nonconformities. The case law is abysmal. As the appeals court said many years ago, it's, quote, difficult and infelicitous, unquote. So I've tried to make it a nice night out. One of the things I've done is anticipate that some changes to single family homes that are non-conforming are always going to be approved. And there's no reason to have a special permit public hearing when you already know the answer. For example, if the house is on a lot that's too small, but the proposed addition to the house complies front, rear, side, and building height, you're going to give it a special permit. Let's just give it a building permit, and there won't be any need for a public hearing. I'll walk you through 3 carve-outs. I have 3. Sudbury has 5. I didn't like 2 of them that make this a whole lot easier. And you also probably, given your location and the age of your housing stock, need some rules for teardowns on non-conforming lots that allow for aesthetic replacement of used up single-family homes with something nicer that fits and doesn't dwarf the other houses in the neighborhood. So those are the 2 areas where I put most of my concentration on nonconformities. I don't know anything about your creative development or OSRD. My guess is that you don't use them often enough. If that's the correct answer, why? And how can we make this a more attractive option for the development community going forward? I have a couple of models that I work with, and I'll show them to you at the appropriate time. And then I noticed you have a section on affordability or inclusionary housing. It said when this applies, here's what we do, but I didn't go back to look at specific sections to see where you're taking these exactions. Are you getting, for example, do you get inclusionary housing when somebody does a single family subdivision, or is this limited to a multifamily building? Do you know the answer?
Generally multifamily.
Okay, well that's easier. Some of your neighbors say that if it's a single family home, they want an affordable contribution, either in a unit after a certain number or in a payment in lieu. And that's more problematic, but multifamily certainly is very doable. And then I'm sure the cannabis moratorium can be deleted. Are you a town that voted yes or no?
We voted no. However, I think it's time for revisiting. We voted no at several years ago.
Yeah, when the first referendum.
Very first.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe, and sorry to interrupt, Bill Spalding, also a member of the planning board. And I don't know if you remember, but we designated a district like out
we did.
On 128, like a little area that this was the only place a dispensary or place of that could go.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I do think, yeah, that could be revisited. I don't know if the bylaw suggests anything like that, but you're right. There's a tiny district way
off Audubon Road, I think.
Audubon, where all the, strip joints will go if we ever build.
Yeah, that's a pretty standard practice. Let's put the strip joints out on the neighboring town's line, and then now we can put the cannabis out there too.
Right.
Well, much like strip joints, there has to be a reasonable opportunity to exercise the business with regard to cannabis. So you can't just put it in the swamp or, on a substandard lot. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Do you have any establishments?
We don't have any cannabis establishments.
I'm doing one town right now that will remain nameless, but they're very small, relatively poor, and they're in the business. They want to spread the word far and wide. Come here. We are interested in having you in our town. So it's not.
Mark, I'm surprised to hear you talk about Melrose that way. Sorry, couldn't help it.
Well, yeah. Good to know. So I've already talked about the Dover Amendment site plan review and the request for reasonable accommodation bylaw. I did not see. I searched the PDF for the word solar. It didn't show up. The other 2 things I just added here to pique your interest would be planned development districts, and this is a really innovative idea because you can't think of everything And this allows the developer to come forward with an idea for a piece of property, which obviously is going to take a 2/3 vote of town meeting. And instead of going it alone, if you like the idea, you go with them and you literally review the bylaw with the developer for whatever you think the impacts might be, traffic, noise, lights. And if those impacts project to be relatively benign, then you would support the idea for a planned development district at town meeting. And once the town meeting votes to put this on the map with the text for the district, it most likely would require a special permit. In Haverhill, where they have done this now 2 or 3 times since we finished our work a couple, 3 years ago, they're figuring, hey, if this has to go to the city council for a 2/3 vote, we don't need to go back for a 2/3 vote for a special permit. It's just enough to get the zoning amendment. Some areas like this that you might know already would be the district in Burlington. You go past the mall and then you're up at the, there's a good restaurant up there, the Bancroft, the district there is all planned development. Burlington's been a mall town for so long, they knocked down the first mall and now they're rebuilding everything. If you go a little further down 128, you clear 4 and 225 and you've got Bedford in the rearview mirror going south. All those buildings on the west side of 128 are individual planned development districts in the town of Lexington. I think Lexington has some 26 or 28 planned development districts. Every one of them are referendum by the voters in order to be developed. And then the last thing is senior housing. Senior housing is everything from independent living with very minimal services, all the way through to assisted living with or without memory units, long-term care facilities, which is the new name for a nursing home, and a continuing care facility. I'm reminded of Carlton Willard in Bedford as a good example of this. These are not only needed, given the aging baby boom generation, me included, but they're also nice contribution to the local revenue stream. When I did some work for the town of Wenham, I had Judy Barrett, who you might know, do a cost benefit analysis, and she came up with for every $1 of taxes contributed to the town of Wenham by a assisted living facility, the town spent 30 or less cents and kept 70 free cash. So that's a nice member of the community in terms of pulling its weight.
To Mark, one more comment, just going back on signs. As you may have noticed, we have 2 sections on signs. An original one that applies to the whole town, and then an overlay district that was created with an updated sign section. You know, one of my comments is I'd love to see them combined, updated, whether it builds off the newer one.
Yeah. Where is the section of town that gets the fancy overlay district?
Certain business districts. It's mainly downtowns, but so what I'd like, you know, anyway, we'll get into it when we get into I'd love to see one common sign bylaw with a set of rules, and it applies to the entire town, and not have an overlay district.
Yeah,
that would be my personal preference. We'll have to see what the committee and other members think, but it's just having to pick and choose a project and say, well, are you in the overlay or not? And then you get different signs and different rules apply. I'd like to do away with it, just as a member of the board who has heard too many of these. So.
Yeah, Mark, and I'll echo that. I'm Erin Kogan. I actually work for the town of Wakefield, and this has actually been on my list of things to do, review our bylaw for our sign overlay district. But I think consistency, one, for our business community and also our special grant, the special permit granting authority. If there's any way that we could look at that in more detail and clean that up, I think that'd be super helpful from an economic development.
Definitely caught my eye, and it's on my list. So
awesome.
And Mark, this is Jim Hogan from the planning board. One of the elements as we've been getting ready to do the MBTA communities, we actually have a working group that's going to be convening within the next month. But one of the things that we've been doing to prep for is reviewing the existing overlay districts we have in the community and seeing if there's any of them that could be valuable precedents. In that zoning review, we rediscovered, which I think some of our members already knew, but we have a pair of districts that are defined, but there's not a map associated with them. The Mid-Rise District 1 and Mid-Rise District number 2. Yeah. I think from a number of people who I've talked to, I think there'd be a strong consensus of just omitting them whole cloth.
Okay. Yep.
So I'd like to put that on your radar, just because if we're going through this process, it's super confusing to have a district defined, but then not have it be applicable or useful in any material manner. And my understanding is it's been that way since the 90s at least.
Okay. I think at one time, Jim, it applied to maybe an area out by Colonial Point where the Audubon Road would envisioned a lot of development. But I think in 2015, when we made a bunch of changes to the multifamily mixed use stuff, those references got updated or removed. And I agree. There's definitions for them, but there's really no use for them or references elsewhere. It's another area to clean up.
Well,
I just don't think they apply anymore. Yeah.
If you're looking at MBTA models, then I think probably the closest thing that we've developed over the years is 40R. You don't have a 40R, do you?
No, but we do have a mixed use multifamily overlay district that is a half mile from Wakefield Station, commuter rail and Greenwood area too, so from our downtown, and that's where you're seeing it's by special permit. So a little different than 40R, but that's where we've seen a number of our housing developments due to that bylaw that was passed back in 2015. So
the MBTA crew at DHCD is having trouble meshing 40R with MBTA.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily want that much affordable because it discourages people. And
exactly.
Currently 40R has a 20% minimum, but in any town with any brains, they just ask for 5% more, and then they get to count all the units like a 40B. So there's pressure to do 40Rs at 25% rental affordable and have it count for MBTA, and DHCD is pushing back. They're going to have to come up with something that appeases the municipalities that want 40R to be their answer for MBTA, but they don't want to do 40R unless they can do 25% and count it all for 40B. That's how these programs always developed out of DHCD over the years. It took a little arm wrestling for these things to get solved, even with 40R. Where are you at on 40B?
We're like our 10%.
Yeah.
So what you mean with our SHI? We are probably right around that 10%. We've had a number of developments that come online, just need all the paperwork submittal, close to it, but I don't have an official number. At the state, we're at like 8.71.
Okay. But you think you're over now?
I would say we're very close.
Okay. Do you have anything currently pending at the ZBA?
But that's not including the new census figures. So
no, nobody has that included yet.
Yeah. So once they release those, that could change. But submitting the new unit forms to the state and getting all the paperwork in and stuff. So I'm assuming we'll see that 10% sooner than later.
There's none before us now. We just approved one a month ago and one about 6 months ago. But again, until the paperwork is taken care of, they don't get counted, right? So yeah, and that's what Erin helps us with. Yeah. One of the many things she helps us with.
Well, this is an interesting time to see the interplay between 40B, 40R, MBTA, and even old transit overlay districts, TODs, because it's all part of the MBTA discussion. Luckily, I'm too old to get worked up about it, so it'll be somebody else's problem. I've probably done, I want to say 12 to 15 40Rs, including one just a couple of months ago in North Attleboro. So it's still a very valuable tool to look at. All right, so I'm happy to hear any other feedback that you have. Let's talk about rough scheduling here going forward. My schedule generally requires me to get a memo in front of you somewhere about a week before the next meeting. I'll send it to Daniel and he can circulate it. So you can plan on having at least a week and always a weekend to take a look at it. With a schedule as methodical as a fall 2024 town meeting, or even spring 25, my suggestion would be that we try to meet, every 6 to 8 weeks. There's no sense in racing to a finish line and then forgetting everything before you get to the main event. I would.
Can I ask something?
Go ahead.
Can I ask something from just an internal staff? Sorry, Erin Kilkindo, I kind of said what my title was, but is there any information I could be providing you to kind of best plan for any of these meetings? Any background information or anything like that?
That's very, very thoughtful. You said, I think Jim said something about a master plan. Where are you at in that process?
So we are hoping to have a final product by July, but I'm sure, they give you one date. So I'd say sometime this late summer, we'll have a final process.
Who's
or
doing
final
it?
document. MAPC.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then we're also having an open space and recreation plan being done as well, which I think could have some helpful information.
Well, I'm sure that the master plan, like most, will have some low-hanging fruit in terms of policy gains and objectives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we'll collectively decide whether or not we want to take advantage of that. Some of the more, like when I did Medford just last year, they were looking at another district where they wanted to emphasize biotech, and that's not part of a recodification. That needs somebody, with a business approach to it and a planning approach to it to assess the land area that they wanted to rezone for suitability. That's beyond my. I'm just a lawyer.
And the one other thing too, I don't know if any of our planning board members were going to talk about it, but I've talked to the ZBA about it, Concom, planning board, any sort of language that could go, I don't know if it'd be in our rules and regs or somewhere in the bylaws about electronic copies. I don't think we currently, for submittal of plans, currently have anything, and please, if I'm wrong with that, but that's something that we've discussed too.
Okay. Would you like to see? Does the planning board have? I mentioned rules and regulations earlier. Do you have other documents besides the zoning bylaw that contain more or less procedural rules?
Aside from rules and regs. Oh, so go ahead, Matt. What was it?
So there's Dan. There are rules and regs that affect how all of the boards have to meet. So in our general bylaws, which you can get to from eCode, there's chapter 9 that does have some general regulations on how all of the boards have to meet. That applies to both the zoning board of appeals as well as planning board, as well as this body too. So there's some information there in terms of formalized rules and regulations that are independently created by the boards. I need the boards to answer that for themselves.
Like even the small town of Berkeley, where I've been their land use lawyer for 25 or 26 years, took the time to develop rules and regulations for the issuance of special permits and site plan approval in the GB and SB districts. And it's 20 pages, 25 pages. It's illustrated. It shows the kind of materials that they want to use, the proportionality of buildings, landscaping, samples. They didn't have to put it in the zoning. And more importantly, they didn't have to have a vote on it in the zoning because they're empowered to do it. The statute delegates to the board, the special permit granting authority, the power to adopt reasonable rules and regulations. And they took advantage of that to come up with something creative. One of the reasons I mention it is because we're finding out that it's hard to apply it to a 180,000 square feet of warehouse. They never thought they'd get one, but we're making the developer tell us what he can do and what he can't do under the regulations. So it has some usefulness, even in those circumstances.
The ZBA does have one, but it's about 20 years old, and we've been trying to get it updated. So that's a work in progress to just bring it up to date. We've talked to Attorney Tom Mullen about other things to add. We've looked at neighboring towns and what some of the things they've done. So we're working on it.
Yeah, a lot of towns adopted zoning board regulations for 40Bs, but many towns never took the first step of adopting basic rules and regulations. You know, how do you submit something to the board, that kind of thing.
Right, or put the fees in there, like you said, instead of in the bylaw, or
exactly, yeah,
or the things you look for when people submit things. Again, some of that is in the bylaws, so we haven't. Our previous rules didn't even talk about it. I think it just left it to the building department to make that determination if they've submitted the right stuff. But no, that's the kind of thing we're considering. It's just how far do we go with it? I wasn't envisioning a 20-25 page document, but in the end, maybe we'll get there if all the parties agree on the board. It's worthwhile information to have. Yeah.
Do you use 53G?
No, don't even know what it is.
So do you engage peer reviewers to help you review a project?
We do. We have like a traffic consultant that peer reviews all projects for the traffic and parking aspects. We've done peer reviews with NAPC with 40Bs. So they're selective, but we've used them multiple times on different things.
Do you rely on your town engineer, or do you have a consulting PE?
Town engineer.
Okay. Sometimes I think that's unfair to the town engineer because there's so many controversial projects. An outside voice that doesn't have to pay the political price is sometimes a welcome compromise. But, you know, it depends on the person, it depends on the project.
Ms. Pearson, you've got a comment? If you can take yourself off mute first. We can't hear you at the moment.
Comment and some questions. Mark, I think you are the excellent person that Wakefield has decided to have do this. I have been taking some notes, and I have noted that things about the floodplains and noted things about FEMA, although FEMA is circulating a new model. I don't know what their old model was, so I don't know their new model, but I do know that floodplains are a concern. I am a member of a group of people who are opposing the destruction of the hill forest across from the school currently, because it does not honor the environment. And it also, since I'll just go quickly to floodplains, it will, well, currently it does, even because it's water-filled rock that goes into neighborhood homes. And I don't know about businesses. I think it's only homes there. And they have constantly sump pumps there. And anything they will do to the environment after they blast half of the hill out and kill all the creatures there and cut the trees down.
Ms. Pearson, you went back on mute.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just talking about floodplains. It was FEMA who had to come in and help the people in the past because the town wouldn't. And I understand there were, well, I don't know if you heard this, but there are constant sump pumps in some people's basements. And also I wrote down that, not the first part of the sentence that I should say, but to conserve the value of land and buildings and prevent blight and pollution of the environment. Now, 45 years ago, was a long time ago, and there are lots of changes. One change is regarding CO2 emissions, and blasting a hilltop is going, and eliminating the trees is going to not reduce CO2. It's going to increase it because the CO2 is absorbed by the trees currently. And it's going to cause a lot of problems, which I won't go into, but you would have, you must have an idea of all the problems. The website of the organization that I can tell you I'm a part of is nemtforest.org. And there's a lot of information there and a lot of people who are opposing this, not neighbors who have their sump pumps all the time or many times because of flooding of these water-filled rocks and the boreholes that they've put in them, which don't tap off or they just keep bubbling up, and the destruction. So that's primarily the changes in the last 45 years towards the environment and the floodplains. Those are the two things that I have gotten out of the conversation today. And I am impressed with the things that you have talked about that you have done. And I think you're an excellent person to do this job.
Well, thank you. One of the things I'd like to show you is a series of performance standards that address environmental issues. You do parking, loading, lights, maybe not lights, but you do landscaping, and those are all performance standards. There should be similar performance standards for traffic and pedestrian safety, site preparation, site clearing, lights, noise, and those are things that communities have drafted in the last 20 or 25 years. I can show you those pretty straightforward standards, and you can, I usually tell towns to order from it like a sushi menu. If you think it's something that's appropriate for you, put it in the book.
Well, when you say you,
I'd rather have you go to site plan review.
Well, when you say
standard.
When you say you, I don't want you to mean me. I want you to mean the town.
No, I do. So, for example, many towns have site plan review and it says minimize adverse impacts on the environment. That's a standard. It would be a whole lot better if you said make no noise louder than 10 dBA above ambient as measured at the nearest property line. That's an objective standard. And that is a standard that the DEP uses for air quality, noise. So I can show you these objective standards. You can bring them and make them part of your special permit site plan review process.
Thank you for your answers.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hogan.
Jim Hogan with the Planning Board again. Mark, excellent presentation. I think this is definitely instilling a lot of confidence for myself in terms of what you're bringing to the table. Question for you in terms of what you've seen in other peer communities in terms of the content and how to communicate it more clearly to people who are going to be utilizing the bylaws. Have you experienced or have you utilized diagrams? You know, I know we have a couple of them in our definitions that are, you know, kind of look like, you know, almost hand drawn to some degree. But, you know, I've seen other communities that I do work with in the professionally that they have, you know, kind of, I guess they call it the form-based, you know, zoning in some respects, where it shows an actual building in relation to the lot lines and such. Is that something that is possible as part of this recodification process, or is that something that's separate and more of a an apart process?
Well, it's sort of all or nothing. I invite you to take a look at Danvers, which rezoned its center with form-based 5 years ago, and it's like it swallowed the rest of the bylaw. I'm looking at your definitions. You've got a sketch for cellar and a few other things. To the extent that the diagrams can be incorporated, I think they're more along the line of your picture of street, which is really a cross section. I'm just scrolling through it to look for others. Yeah, I'm form-based code is an art in and of itself. I'm not a subscriber, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I've tended to emphasize performance standards that are narrative rather than pictorial. So, but I'm certainly prepared to, show you some illustrations that I think are useful. My own bylaw here in Concord has a number of different illustrations for things like lot width, lot shape, that do serve a useful purpose.
Yeah, I'm more thinking in terms of from the definitions perspective, there's probably a lot of value there.
Yeah, I can show you different examples.
Mr. McGrail, I noticed you'd raised your hand earlier in the meeting. Wasn't sure if you had any comments, questions.
Just a couple of quick questions. Hi, Mark. How are you? Brian McGrail. I'm a local practicing attorney in town for probably about 32 years. So I have a lot of experience with the bylaw, and I look forward to you being involved with this process. I'm glad to say that I'm a loyal customer of yours, having renewed my subscription to your book on a yearly basis. And it's a great book that all of us land use attorneys rely on a daily basis.
Thank you. Very kind.
I just had, I was curious, on our non-conformities, it's a finding standard where we don't have it as a special permit process in Wakefield.
Yeah.
And my experience is other communities have is, it's kind of a mixed. Do you have any feelings on that?
Well, I think at its heart, it's just a procedural choice. Finding would be a 3-2 vote. A special permit would be a 4-1 vote. Certainly many towns bifurcate. On a single family home, for example, it would be a finding. On a widget factory, it would be a special permit. So there's all kinds of options there. I think I would give single family homes the benefit of every doubt. So I would be more inclined to favor a finding for a single family home or a 2-family. I think the statute lumps them together. Whereas a nonconformity for a pizza parlor would, not necessarily get the same benefit of the doubt.
If it's going to be
and have to face the tougher standard of 4-1.
If it's going to be a change of use, for example.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay. And the other thing I just want to point out is we have a section 190.95, which actually attempts to do what you had thought about, had mentioned as far as planning a project with the planning board and then taking it to town meeting.
Yeah.
There is a provision in our bylaw that was put in back in 2004 that probably needs some scrutiny by you and comment on, but Wakefield already has the template for that. It's never been used. It was put in back in 2004 by our then town planner, Paul Revis, who wrote that with a consultant. I think back then there was a consultant involved. And so it already is in our bylaw, but it certainly needs some revisions and maybe some updating, but it is it creates a great opportunity to work with the planning board on perhaps a unique project to go jointly before town meeting.
What was that number again, Jim?
It's 190-95.
Okay.
Is that the creative development?
It's called creative development section of the bylaw.
Oh, okay.
So it's buried in the back.
Yep, I see it.
And it's never been utilized, but you had mentioned it as a possible good idea. We've already have the opportunity in the bylaw for maybe you to put your touch on it.
Well, I think it's exciting. I think it's probably the most exciting thing I do in my practice. I was Dedham's planning board lawyer a long time, and we actually had the Hebrew Senior Living Group proposed an intergenerational campus on the top of a hill overlooking the Charles River, right off of 128. It's the Rashi School, which is like, I think K-9, an assisted living facility, a long-term care facility, a child care center, and about 90 acres of conservation land. What book in America has an intergenerational campus listed as an eligible use in a district? None. The answer is none. And it's there today. It's been up and running for 15, 18 years at this point. So the creativity comes out when you allow for those kinds of experiments. Some might be busts, but more often than not, the developers really put some thought into it and knows he can make a go of it.
Excellent. And Ms. Pearson will get to you. Just want to ask a question from someone who had to depart the meeting and send it to me. And it's two parts. The first part is if there are any parts of the zoning bylaw that have particular urgency to be updated to make sure that it's consistent with state law, and if that would change the way that we would potentially implement any sections, if there's any sections that seem to have an urgency. So the area in particular that was being asked about was 19070E changes that currently requires a 2/3 vote for adoption of or change to any zoning bylaw. Should we have that voting requirement in the bylaw or just reference state law so that it, as state law changes?
Well, that is the, what sentence provision, Dan, did you say?
It's 19070E is an echo. Because when MGL 48 section 5 changed from 2/3 to majority for some types of housing, that doesn't impact Wakefield because of the bylaw itself. It specifically requires all zoning.
Yeah, that's only going to apply to new legislation going forward, not anything on the books today. And it applies to certain types of accessory dwelling units. I don't think any of that is dire. I think it's just an option that you would consider. And I think you have a more traditional accessory apartment bylaw. You'd have to change that to come into the governor's world of definitions, for example. You know, some of the things that probably should be changed sooner than later, I probably don't want to mention. Talked a little bit about them already, but I don't see you getting a whole lot of pressure for adult uses. I think you definitely need to have something on solar, because otherwise you're at the mercy of the statute. The statute says, Chapter 48, Section 3 has a provision on solar that just says no ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit or unreasonably regulate solar energy systems except to protect public health, safety, or welfare. So it's an exception or a protection like that for churches, schools, and childcare centers, but it's not the same language. Don't ask me why the legislature couldn't just use the same language, but they didn't. So there's a big tussle going on right now between many communities which want to ban large-scale ground-mounted photovoltaic facilities in their biggest residential districts, and the industry, which is saying you can't stop us. The land court's taken a more aggressive position than the Supreme Judicial Court. There was a Waltham case that made it up to the Supreme Judicial Court back in the summer, but it was an easy case. Waltham banned that kind of facility in 98% of Waltham, and the court said you can't do that. But what does that teach everybody else? Very little. So if there are pressures in Wakefield for small, medium, or large scale solar energy, you got to come up with a better answer than you can't do it in our residence district.
Okay.
And it seems like every week there's another case.
That's very helpful. Ms. Pearson.
Thank you. Yes, I had forgotten one point, and that is what you've just been talking about kind of segues into what I had wanted to say at the very bottom of my paper here. If this will not be finished, this recodification will not really be finished until about fall of 24 or even spring of 25, does that mean that the town will use what's on the books today?
Everything that's on the books today, yeah, stays. It all stays on the books as is until the town meeting comes where we put this in front of the voters. The typical end game is to have this all deleted in one fell swoop and substituted in one fell swoop. Other towns have tried different strategies and they work as well. I don't advise doing half of it and then the other half, because the framework is everything. I'd rather have you do a changeover in framework to the tune of about 75% of the provisions, and then piecemeal fill in the gaps over the next year or two or three, than to try to do 50% and then 50% the next year. I was working with Manchester by the Sea. They eventually had a town meeting in the fall of this past year, and they more or less took it over on their own. And unfortunately, they got halfway through town meeting, and the framework changed, and it kind of left them out to sea. I mean, was it the old framework or the new framework? What was left of the old bylaw? What was in from the new bylaw? It got beat up pretty bad. I'd rather have an up or down vote and take my lumps.
Could there possibly be some delays of things that are very important and need to be changed, so that they will not happen until the bylaws are changed or recodified?
Well, I think a good example would be changing the site plan where no special permit is required to require a public hearing and to go directly to court. You can keep going the way you're going now. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think anybody will die if you do. I'd rather see you change that sooner rather than later. And if you changed it now, I could easily fit it into the existing numbering system and then pull it back out when the numbering system changes.
So if I can try to explain a little bit about the adoption process, I think this may help a little bit for this question. Is it the recodification process, which is likely to take, just given the amount of meetings, amount of interest, revisions, and so forth, realistically, about 18 to 24 months is realistic for the amount of time that's needed. And once the initial framework is effectively ready for town meeting, the bylaw review committee will then take a vote to recommend it. At that point, it will actually go to the town council to then be referred to the planning board. The planning board then gets to have an independent opinion as to whether to take recommend favorable or unfavorable action on it at town meeting. Once that has happened, so you now have 4 steps. It's on the town meeting warrant, it goes to town meeting. Town meeting then will hopefully adopt it, as Attorney Bobrowski was mentioning, as ideally a single motion to remove the current zoning and adopt the replacement zoning. At that point, it then goes to the Attorney General for validation. Once the Attorney General has approved it, it then has to get published. The publication will likely be by distribution to a location within every precinct within the town itself as a physical book. It's the most effective way to do the actual publication in the town. At that point, it will then become effective as of the date of town meeting, retroactive. So that's the process for the actual adoption itself. So there is a time to do the preparation. That's what we're starting now, which is to get the words right and diagrams as necessary, to get those portions correct. And at that point, we will, and that's something that's being done by the bylaw review in consultation with planning board, with zoning board of appeals, with others who are interested, everyone on this call and more. And then it will go through the rest of the process. So hopefully that gets to the heart of things. It does take time for this to be done. For projects that are in process, such as the various projects that have been referenced, you were referencing the school that is in the process of being permitted, then those are going to undergo in this time period under the current zoning, which is what is on the books as of now. So we don't have the ability to say, okay, we're going to stop everything in the meantime until this process is finished. We're not going to put a moratorium on everything for the next 2+ years while this is in process. If there are things that need to be done in the meantime, and I think that's what the prior question was getting to, that can be done if it is deemed of particular interest, and then it will effectively get rolled into the single motion for the replacement. I think I'm communicating that reasonably correctly. Attorney Borowski, if you can correct anything that said that it isn't quite right, I want to make sure that this is clear.
No, it sounded fine to me. I've heard a couple of references to town council, CIL. Is that your Board of Selectmen?
That is our equivalent. That is what the Board of Selectmen, what was formerly known as the Board of Selectmen, is referred to. It was not a town. It was not voted as a select board. It went directly to a town council. CIL, they are the executive officer of the town, which is not to be confused with town council. SEL, which is Tom Mullen.
Yeah.
But you're still a town. You haven't gone to a city form of government.
No.
Correct. We are still a town. Town council is an executive form of government with it's the executive officer of the town, and the day-to-day operations are still handled by the town administrator.
Okay.
So it's a funky naming.
A lot of our mid-range to larger towns have gone to city, Randolph, North Attleboro, Weymouth, and they're now headed by an executive board called town council. So that's you've kept the status of a town, but you adopted the new name. So congratulations.
It makes for wonderful confusion.
There you go.
So, okay, Ms. Della Volpe, I believe you've got a comment. We can't hear you at the moment. You're not listed on mute.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. I very much appreciated Mr. Bobrowski's presentation. He brought up many things that I have been advocating for years because it makes sense. It streamlines the process, and I think makes for a more equitable process. My question is for clarification. When this goes to town meeting, would that be recodification of all of the bylaws at once in one fell swoop? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, all of the zoning bylaw, yes.
In one fell swoop.
That's the preferable way I do it. I can be talked out of it. If it's going to fail, I don't want to do it that way. But
well, we have a hard enough time educating the public before town meeting on one zoning bylaw change.
Yeah, I know.
It is, and this is a real problem. Attendance at town meeting is low as it is.
Are you open or representative?
Open town meeting. Open town meeting.
Open town meeting, no quorum, to be more specific on the elements. At the moment, no electronic voting yet.
And so I don't know, without a massive, concerted, orchestrated effort with open public forums, numerous open public forums to educate the public about all of these changes, I frankly do not know how anyone and you know me, I'm one of these people who's paying attention. It's hard enough to follow. I cannot recommend this. Perhaps it's the best way just to do it in one fell swoop. But as I said, Wakefield has a history of not educating the public proactively enough on zoning changes. And that has to change, particularly if you're going to be presenting this many zoning changes to the public. Man, you got to have your act together before, if it's really going to be valid, because people won't know. I really recommend that you rethink this, the way it's going to be presented to town meeting. Thank you.
I'm open to suggestions, certainly. You know, I can't say that it's getting any easier for exactly the reasons that you've just mentioned. It used to, I mean, I've done, you know, many medium-sized communities like Wakefield, Foxborough, Sharon, Canton, Norwood, Westwood, all up and down Dedham, all up and down 128. And it seemed like it was a pretty easy process 15 years ago. I think just the climate has changed in town government that makes it more difficult today. I won't say it's easier than it used to be. It's not. But you're right. The answer is probably a great amount of information sessions at which we just go over it again and again until everybody understands it. But even that, somebody's going to stand up in the first 5 minutes of town meeting and say, this is too big a document. And the next person's going to say, you know, how am I expected to read this? It happens all the time.
Yes, it does happen all the time. And that's one reason why I want this group and others to start thinking about it now. Because these will be some major changes. Some will be minor, some won't have any changes at all. But from what I'm hearing tonight, and a lot of it I like very much, there's got to be a concerted effort in place starting now if this is going to work at town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Hogan.
Question for Mr. Lieber. This is a two-thirds vote once it gets to town meeting, correct?
Yeah.
My understanding is because of the current zoning bylaw, it would require that unless there's a state law that would supersede it.
The only question I would have is that the changes to the state law as it relates to multifamily development would impact any of this as it relates to those individual provisions, or because it's a broad enough scope, it would be the 2/3.
I would anticipate it would be 2/3. It would be a question for the moderator to ultimately make that decision, but I would anticipate it would be a 2/3 vote.
Yes,
Yep.
it will.
And then the other question I would have for Mr. Bombrowski is there any other peer communities that you think, if we wanted to pull up those bylaws and just review them for our own educational purposes, that you would recommend as particularly effective or applicable to us as a peer community?
Sure. I would look at Linfield, which I did maybe 5 years ago. Medford was very recent. It's a city, but you'll get a different feel for things. Burlington, I probably did 10 years ago. Lexington was an enormous project that I did about the same time. Those are probably good places to start.
And then the other question I had is, you know, to some of the concerns that Ms. Della Volpe were asking, I'm in complete agreement with you, Mr. Bombrowski, in terms of a wholesale proposal. I think trying to piecemeal this out is just a recipe for an extended process that I don't necessarily view as beneficial to the public. But the conversations as it relates to education and or buy-in from the public, I think, are valid. What have you seen in terms of other peer communities? If we're going to have to convince 2/3 of town meeting to be supportive of this, what are some of the other steps that you've seen that we should, as you know, the various members on the call here, should be thinking about, you know, as we're engaging in this process?
Well, your contract is unique in that Tom Mullen, your town council, got back to me after the first standard contract I sent, and he said they'd like you to add a provision that says they can buy more hours from you once you get through the 10-step process that you usually do. And I said, no problem. So I just put in something that said, I'm going to bill you at an hourly rate. And I didn't put a limit on it. And I think the answer is that you just take advantage of me to the extent you want me to come to a meeting every 2 weeks to get the word out, especially as the town meeting time is rolling up. Then normally to be perfectly frank with you, normally I'm on draft 11 and the town is taking advantage of my good graces, and the contract should have been over after draft 4. And, you know, at some point, somebody is smart enough to say, why don't we go on an hourly basis now? But yours is built in. So I have no problem with, you know, been showing up more often whenever you think it's appropriate.
But I guess my question is that have you seen other peer communities that have to go through the town meeting? Have you seen them have, successful public engagement in the Zoom era, for lack of a better term, for, hosting like a public forum? Has that been an effective manner to actually get the word out and prevent some of those critiques? How am I supposed to know about this, et cetera? Because I think what we've seen over the past couple of years since COVID is that a precipitous decline in terms of we've had a lot of public forums and we've had sparse attendance.
Yeah. Well, that's probably to be expected. And probably the best luck I've had recently is Medford, where I thoroughly enjoyed working with the staff and the city council. But they, I only had to count 9 votes. I didn't have to count 300. So different game. I just think it's, having an all boards meeting gets that side of things going. Those are the people that have taken an active and contributing interest in the community enough to, spend private time doing public good. But then there's the stakeholders, where I think you need people to turn out who make their living developing land, representing people that develop land, and they need to pass the word as well, because they're important figures in the community who get listened to. So, for example, Mr. McGrail may, think that what we're doing is business friendly and spread the word, and that attracts the business community to the idea. I have plenty of business friendly ideas. Normally people look at regulation as being the enemy of business, but I can't tell you the number of times I've walked into a meeting and people in the business community have said, "Where have you been all along? This is so much better. We're not yelling at each other anymore."
And I'm just going to add along those lines. We, as a committee, we have been very specific to reach out to many different parts of the community and business community for this meeting, and will continue to do so that people have the opportunity to be a part of this process. It's something that Mr. Bobrowski mentioned as he opened, and as a committee, we're really taking to heart. As you can see in this meeting, we're open to engagement, and we hope that it's through that engagement and through the openness that the community, which we all live in, has the ability to really feel that we are taking ownership of it. We're probably individually going to have different areas that we say, well, that's not really what I would like as ideal for that particular aspect. But overall, is it something I can support? Yes. And that's part of the give and take of making sure that we're coming up with a set of zoning bylaws that really meet the community need. But we need everyone's help to really get the word out and get the process out. And that's part of for having a lot of meetings and having joint meetings with the planning board, with zoning board of appeals. I think that, and other boards that are, and other persons that are of interest, I think will be really helpful. So all these meetings will certainly be posted, typically with as much notice as possible. So with that, Mr. Noel, and then Mr. Hatfield.
Thank you, Theo Noel. I'm the current chair of the planning board. We're really engaged in the process, and I think it would be very important for the planning board, I think, together with the other boards, to really help continue the public engagement around these topics. And I really do see sort of a coordinated approach as the bylaw review committee is completing a section, particularly when there's not just form changes, but some content changes or some simplifications. That would be a really important time for the planning board to have a public hearing or some form of discussion to help explain that and be able to explain it in comprehensible time frame and chunks and do that over time, and to do this coordinated manner with the bylaw review committee, but also with ZBA and Concom and others as we can see fit and to coordinate it.
There are
that would be an important part.
There are some topics that are discrete to one board, and and some boards can run those up their flagpole. That really makes sense. So nonconformities is pretty discrete to the ZBA. Site plan review is pretty discrete to the planning board. So those are things, you know, the other boards aren't necessarily involved in that.
Yeah, that, yeah, I certainly appreciate that. And I think there, you know, we've encountered a lot of topics through the planning board that we feel like we can really do a good job of public engagement and help think through some of the broader land use implications of. So we don't want these conversations to just sit in the bylaw review committee. The more opportunities to have these conversations, the better. So
my comments are going to piggyback off that, Dale, and you know, Dan, what's our thinking on, you know, posting drafts as we go along into the, maybe set up a page on the bylaw review committee website for zoning bylaw recodification. And so in addition to the meeting minutes and agendas, we're posting drafts as we go along here. We can point people to it when it comes time to running things through the planning board. Those are public hearings. We can make sure that word gets out there far and wide. We can think about writing to the item and getting information out that way. We can engage the public in other manners. But again, if we have some central place we can be pointing people back to, that's just one way that can help. All of that can reference back to a site. So, Mr. Borowski, do you see any problem with posting drafts as we go along?
No, not at all.
That? Okay, because it's a work in progress. People need to understand it's a work in progress, but I think they can start to get their head around it. And
I will make my memos to you eminently postable. So
awesome.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
So I'm going to suggest that we have our next meeting on the 27th of April. Does that work for folks? That's a Thursday. Is Monday a better night?
We typically do our meetings on the first and third Mondays of the month.
Okay.
And that's so that we don't have conflicts with the town council, CIL, to be clear, who would meet on the second and fourth Mondays of the month.
Would May Day be a good day, do you think? That's the first Monday.
The first Monday of May, I don't see any issues with that. We can certainly do that. We can, if that actually should work well. May 15th is currently set for town meeting, I believe. So May 1st should work well for the next meeting on this topic.
So
for the meetings for this topic, the only administrative work that we will plan to do is possibly approval of minutes, but other than that, all other topics get pushed to other meetings.
Okay. I'm figuring if we can be done with the theme-oriented meetings by Labor Day, I can put a first draft together for October. We can tweak it until Christmas and break out the new year with as many workshops as we want to try to schedule. That's generally probably about the place we'll be.
That seems like a workable approach for those on the other boards. Does that seem like a reasonable approach? And again, as these get scheduled, as there's topics, we will certainly distribute those. For those in the community, we will also, if you'd like to be, get specific notices of things, I have no problem sending those out either. My goal is to have open communication, and this board is always open for information as much as possible.
That's good.
So as I said, I will have a memo in your hands somewhere probably around the 24th of April. And I will actually have this memo usually has section 1 and section 5 and section 10 of the recodified bylaw. So that's purpose and authority, sort of a handshake of the bylaw, nonconformities, which is section 5, and administration and enforcement, which is section 10.
Thank you. Thank you for that information.
And you'll see, I do take your old, and if I don't like it, I strike it out. I can tell you right now, I'm going to take your entire nonconformity section and strike it out. So
I think you're going to take our entire zoning bylaw and strike it out. In the end. It's part of the
right now
motion.
that at the end of the day, 75% of the bylaw will still be what it is today. Might be in a different place. It might be a little neater, but it'll still be what you have today. That's the general rule.
Okay. Sounds good. And I look forward to seeing how this all continues to conform and how it evolves over time, as it will. A couple of upcoming dates, just for people's awareness. Our next meeting is currently scheduled to be Monday, April 3rd. That meeting will be on the general bylaws. For anyone who wishes to attend, you are welcome to do so. Agenda will be posted in advance of that meeting. Following that will be May 1st, again, 7 p.m. currently by Zoom. The anticipation is that Zoom meetings will still be permitted as an exclusive method. There's some pieces of state law as it relates to open meeting law and the ability to do Zoom meetings that's currently being worked on, but that is anticipated to be acceptable. So the current plan is for this topic to be on the May 1st meeting, again, 7 p.m. by Zoom. Patriots Day is Monday, April 17th. Please feel free to go to the marathon and watch it. Should be an exciting time. As a result of that tax day, it's actually is the next day on Tuesday, April 18th. Also as a result of it being a holiday in Washington, D.C. So for those who are looking for when your income taxes are due, it's due Tuesday, April 18th. Annual town meeting is Monday, May 15th, 7 p.m. Galvin Middle School. Last thing, just want to mention is that we did have one member of the bylaw review committee who unfortunately had to step down from the committee. And with that, I'd like to publicly give thanks to Lisa Patel. And she was able to join us for many meetings. And she did send in notification. She has a bunch of things going on that she no longer has the time to dedicate to the committee. So with that, she gets a lot of thanks for her service. There will likely be a posting for additional members. So if those who want to spend a lot of time on this want to send in applications, that will actually go through the town council, CIL, who has the ability to be the appointing authority to members to this body. So with that, any other announcements or information that needs to be shared? Otherwise, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Tim makes motion to adjourn and quickly seconds that. Catherine, you were not as fast on the unmute button for this particular one. Any discussion on the motion to adjourn? Seeing no discussion, I'm going to call on the members of the Bylaw Review Committee in the order in which you now appear on my screen. Some things moved around a little bit. So Anne.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Lucy.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
And Eric had to depart as the library closed around 9 o'clock. He left at 8:56. I vote in the affirmative. With that, the meeting is adjourned at 9:05. Thank you, Mr. Bobrowski, Attorney Bobrowski, for all of your time, expertise. We look forward to continuing to work with you. For those who contributed, thank you very much. Really appreciate all of the comments. I look forward to working with all of you to come up with a wonderful product that really meets our community needs. Thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.